What's quacking, guys? It's Duck Chris, and today I'm back to talk about sailing because the poll is up and the politics are getting thick. This is a unique time in old school RuneScape history, and I wanted to run down exactly the situation as I see it, what might happen, the math, the numbers, and basically the different mindsets that I've seen going around. Let's start with the no voters. As a lot of things have happened over the course of old school RuneScape history, there's a lot of issues that have consistent no voters. And sailing is no different. The people who have said that they absolutely don't want sailing in the game and will be voting no under any circumstances fall into a couple different camps. Number one is the people who want no big changes at all to the game. Now, this is kind of more of a reasonable position than I feel like some people might think, because the fact is a lot of these voters would be fine with a variety of updates as long as, maybe they could ignore them. Even a raid, for example, that they didn't like, they just say like, oh, well, I just don't do that raid. And then maybe the items, like I use them or I don't use them or whatever. I wait for something better to come out. But there's a bigger impact to something like sailing that can't really be ignored. At the end of the day, if you have a totally new skill coming to the game, you can't ignore that. You have to train it. There's benefits all over the game. You have to do it to max. You have to do it to do quests. It'll have benefits for skilling, pure PVM, for general quality of life. And that's not something you can ignore. So there's the voters who are just going to vote no matter what any change this big. And that's a significant amount of people. We have the people who want no skill ever. These people might be amenable to larger changes in gameplay, but not specifically for skilling. Maybe they don't like skilling. Maybe they don't like the idea of a new skill. Maybe they've been burned by new skill ideas in the past, either in RS2 or earlier old school ideas, where they think the skills that we have now are just so old school that they would never want anything else in addition to that. And then, of course, there's the people who say skilling's fine, a new skill's fine, but not this skill. It's just a bad skill. And, that's a decent enough outlook, but the thing is that if you don't vote for this skill, which has been developed to death, then what would you vote for? A lot of people might say shamanism, but the truth is that shamanism, if we get it to the point where it's been developed as much as this, I'm sure the pro-sailing people or the pro-taming people would just vote it negative in the same way. However, that's your prerogative if you don't like sailing, but you like other skills and you think this is the pathway to get them to those skills. That's another way that people are voting no. And then you have your yes voters. You have a couple different categories of yes voters as well. You have your sure, why not people. The people who will vote yes to most anything and just think, well, it seems good enough. I haven't really read the blogs, but I'll just vote for it, and sure, why not? This is I think a large majority of the yes voters to most updates is people who can't be bothered to necessarily read all the details, but they like what they see, and they think, any new content is probably good. You have your this is the greatest thing ever type enthusiast who will literally vote yes to everything that they see that's shiny and new, or people who just have wanted sailing forever and they're just totally biased because in 2006 they said, I want sailing to be a skill and I'm totally going to vote for it because of that. There's definitely a lot of those people out there, and that's something that is going to shape this poll no matter what. A lot of people say that it's shaped how the skill process has gone as a whole because it means that these people are kind of voting as biased voters, and that's always going to be the case. If you like something that you like just because you really like it and you've always liked it, then no amount of reasoning is going to convince you yes or no. Of course, we have Jagex also in this equation, trying to cater to a couple of the different kinds of voters. We have the blogs that they've put out for people who really like to read the design process, and that might have convinced people to become maybe one of these third type of voters where third type of yes voters where they're, they've read enough material that has convinced them that it's good for the skill, the skill is good for the game. Maybe they've grown a personal attachment to it through the whole process since they've been involved in the development, or at least they feel that they have. In that way, Jagex is kind of selling the skill through community involvement. This is no different than a lot of other polls. Once people feel like their feedback's been listened to, they're much more willing to vote yes to something. And in that way, a lot of the stuff that Jagex polls are kind of, one could say, forced into the game, although it's not really forced. It's more just like adjusted so that it fits into the game, no matter what you have to adjust. And of course, we have the runoff poll situation, which a lot of people have said is a key turnoff for them. The initial poll where they decided which skill would be developed was pretty close. We'll get into the actual numbers in a bit, but a lot of people were saying maybe they should have done a second runoff poll or some more development work with both shamanism and sailing together so that you could have a more meaningful choice. But I think that's probably a mistake. One of the things that it's pretty clear now is that there are those people who were such a big fan of one or the other ideas that they'll shoot down whatever idea that isn't that. And I think that would only be worse if you spent more time developing it. For example, if you got to the point where shamanism was potentially coming in the game, the same as sailing, the shamanism voters would totally vote no to sailing. And the sailing voters would totally vote no to shamanism because it seems like it's one or the other at this point. And even if it's not in the end, it still is in the short term. So in terms of the runoff situation, I don't think it would have been any better. If we look at the numbers for the skill pitches poll where you had to pick between the three pitches, sailing received 36% of the vote and shamanism received 33% of the vote. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that seems a lot like, it seems a lot lower than 70%. If you kept both of those on the table and said vote for one of these, I don't think any of them would get to 70% because you have the 33% of people voting no from the other side. Now, how much do those numbers actually matter? How much do those numbers actually stack up? Well, one thing we can look at is this percentage difference, right? We have 36% for sailing and 33% for shamanism, but that's not as close as it might look from that. There's actually 6,000 votes different for those two, and that's not a small number. In the case of these polls, a lot of these times, like, we have less than 200,000 votes, so that's at least 3% of the total votes being different there. And when it comes to something like a new skill, you're going to need as much as you can for it to pass. And of course, as I said, they had to pick one. When we look at the history of new skill polls, there's been some pretty contentious polls in the past. Warding was the most recent one, and it had a total of 125,000 votes, of which 66% said yes. Now, 6% of 125 is like close to 7 or 8%, or 7 or 8,000 votes. And if we had 7 or 8,000 more votes, warding probably would have passed. You can see if it's 66% yes, it only needed 3% more to pass. So really, if the skill was that much better, it would have passed. In terms of the actual poll for the new skill that was done in this past Winter Summit, basically saying, do you guys want a new skill at all? Is that something we should explore? There were 191,000 total votes, and 81% of them were yes votes. So that's 36K saying no. But what does that mean for this poll? So currently, the sailing poll that is going on right now has about 149K votes. So let's pick some math here. If the 36,000 people that all voted no to a new skill, that was 19% at the time, all voted in this skill. Let's say they were so dedicated to having no skill that they're like, I have to vote in this one. Then that means already that 24% of the votes would be no, leaving only 6% margin for the rest of us. That's pretty steep. And while I don't think that that's actually the case, I don't think all those people are going to come back and vote in this. It's a very tight margin to get a skill to pass. You need a lot of the total skill people, the people who wanted a skill in general, to agree on sailing. If 19% of people voted no to the skill, being the same percentage of people that voted no to a new skill in general, so let's saying we kept the same demographic. If 19% of people just voted no because they didn't want any skill whatsoever, then that would leave 11% left in the balance. So basically 11% more margin of error before the skill would just never pass. And if we take that 11% of the voters that have currently voted and do a little bit of math, it basically says that you have 14% of the people who voted for a skill. That's the max that can ever say no to something like sailing. So, and that's, again, assuming that our demographics hold steady from the first poll. If more people have said that they don't want, like a more percentage of people have said that they don't want a skill in general, maybe the process was too long, maybe all of the development they've seen made it feel like it's never going to fit in, then we're even worse off. But I think it's safe to assume that around the same amount of people have the same sort of opinion that they had previously, and that they'll mobilize in about the same degree that they did for the last poll. So let's say 14% of yes voters as a whole for all skills have to vote. 86% of yes voters have to vote for sailing to pass. That being a whole lot of the people from shamanism have to vote for sailing to pass. What do these numbers mean? Well, these numbers just mean that sailing is kind of teetering right on the edge. As I've kind of outlined, there are a lot of reasons to vote yes. You know, whether you just like it, or whether you just vote yes to everything, or whether you've been convinced through the development process, the blogs, the stages calls, and all the rounds of feedback. But there are also a lot of reasons to vote no. Whether you don't want any big changes to the game, whether you don't want any skills whatsoever, or whether you've decided, for whatever reason, that voting no to this skill is the best way to get your preferred skill in. But I think it's important to notice that if you want any skill to come in, you need 86% actually, of the people who want a skill to agree on that skill. Now, what does this mean? We've got 2 days left. The vote totals are looking to be almost as high as the Summer Summit poll, if not higher, and definitely a lot higher than the Warding poll. People are getting out for this poll in bigger numbers. Does that mean we have more new people? Does that mean people feel more strongly about this? I'm not sure. What I do know is this poll has become one of the most political in the game. Your stance on it, people get angry at each other. People think that the other side, has no possible reason to feel the way that they feel. And people think that no matter what happens, the game will be ruined, depending on who you ask. So what do you think? Is sailing really going to ruin the game? Are you voting no for one of the reasons I outlined, or another reason? Are you voting yes for one of the reasons I outlined, or another reason? If you think other people should vote the way you do, feel free to campaign. I've been doing it on Twitter. I've tagged my political opponents. I've made posters. I've, appealed directly to my friends. I think that sailing is a great skill, and I want you to vote yes. But people who believe the opposite have been doing the exact opposite. They've said sailing is a horrible skill, and you need to vote no. Ultimately, your vote is your vote, and it only matters as much as you are willing to put into it. So, yeah, let me know what you are voting. Let me know what you think of this whole process. And I guess we'll see what happens in a couple days. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a comment, tell me what you think, and subscribe to the channel. I've passed 2,000 subscribers now, and I'm feeling really good about it. If you want to check out some of my other videos, I have a ton of other videos on sailing, as well as some guides, general rambles, and other things that I'm sure are worth checking out. But until next time, this has been the Duck Chris. Peace.